Hi everybody, Miss C here, about to go through your lesson. So I'll get rid of my face, and here we go. So this first slide might be a shape that you know, okay, but maybe you don't know how to find the area of it. But yesterday, we found area using triangles and rectangles. So let's break this shape down into those shapes that we already do know. Okay, so for example, I see a triangle here. Okay, so I need the base and the height. So this 5 is still representing the same height of 5 here, just like the 3 down here is representing that base of 3. So I sometimes, when I'm doing these, I like to break them down and redraw them so I can see them a little bit more clearly. Okay, then I know I can do base times height divide by 2, which that ends up being 15 divided by 2. Okay, so yes, we have decimals. Oh my goodness. Okay, I see another rectangle on the other, or excuse me, triangle on the other side here. Okay, so you're really just trying to break it up into shapes that you know. So again, I like to redraw them on the side. That 5 is still the same 5. Okay, but this time, in order to get that base, it's a little bit tougher. If I look at this all the way across, it's saying it's 14. Okay, but I chopped it off right here, which means I chopped off 8 meters. So 8 plus what got us up to 14? Or 14 minus 8 will get us that base that we need. Okay, so then I can go through and do base times height divide by 2 since I made a triangle. And the last chunk that I have to look at is in the middle here. Okay, it ends up being a square because it's a 5 by 5. So 5 times 5 is 25. Well, that color's kind of hard to see. Okay, and then the last step is to just add them all together to get your total area of 47 and a half, and it's in meters squared. So maybe you used a different way to do it. That's awesome. But breaking it down into pieces that we know is a good place to start. So why don't you try this shape? Okay, so if we look, we had 2 identical triangles on the top and the bottom. And then we had a rectangle in the middle that was a 5 by 6. So if we add together those 2 triangles and the rectangle, we get 54. Okay, so we're going to go through and look at those 2 shapes today and see the formula that they have on their own. So let's start with the parallelogram. So this problem is saying you have 2 classmates that are kind of arguing about who's correct here. Okay, so Kanisha thinks that the rectangle and parallelogram below have the, well, I should say above, have the same area, but Chandra disagrees. Who's correct? So let's think about the parallelogram because we already know that a rectangle is just base times height. Okay, but take a look at this parallelogram. They're taking that triangle part, okay, the part that makes it a slanted rectangle, and they're pulling it over to kind of fit it like a puzzle piece. And when it fits in like a puzzle piece, what shape is it making? Da, 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 a rectangle. And so here it is not moving in case that bothered you a little bit. Okay, so the part that makes it slanty, okay, that makes it parallel, a parallelogram, we take that part off and fit it in to that empty slanted side, and it makes a rectangle. Okay, so if a rectangle and a parallelogram are truly just the same shape, okay, then that means we can find the area the same way as we find an area for a rectangle. So area for a rectangle is just base times height, or in this case, 8 times 20, which means for the parallelogram, it's going to be the same. So let's see who was right here. Kanisha was right. Too bad, Sandra. Maybe next time. So let's take that knowledge and kind of apply it to an actual problem here. Remember, I could take this chunk off and draw it in over here to make a rectangle. So like that wouldn't be there. And I just made a 4 by 9 rectangle. So we're just going to do 4 times 9 to get 36. Why don't you try? This one's a little trickier. Okay, so for this one, they gave you 3 values. Okay, so they gave you the slanted side, which we don't need. Keep in mind, if we were taking off this triangle part and redrawing it here, okay, that would be this value, which we don't need. Okay, so this is what it would look like. Here's that value 4 that they gave you, but all we want is the base and the height. So 3 times 7. So sometimes they'll put those extra numbers in there to try to trick you when you're really still just looking for your base times height. Okay, so last one. Again, we don't need this value. Now, if they ever asked for perimeter, we might need that. But if we're doing area, we just need that base and the height. Okay, so there's not much else to the parallelograms, but just that idea of bringing this other triangle to the other side to form a rectangle is where the formula came from, is an important piece to understand. So our second shape that we're going to look at is a trapezoid. And really, I would like if this picture had showed the height, because most of our pictures will need to have that in order for us to find the area. So we're going to kind of think the same idea here. Let me take another trapezoid, turn it, make it line up. What shape did we just make? Okay, so you'll see it highlighted here so that you can maybe try to see it a little bit easier. Okay, that shape in yellow, we just made a parallelogram. So basically, what it's saying is, if you took your trapezoid, duplicated it, flipped it to make it match together, you make one big parallelogram. And we just learned that area for a parallelogram is base times height. Okay, so for us, height is just height. That's not a big deal. So that one's kind of done. But for the base, okay, so for the base, you can either look at the top or the bottom side. You have to add together base 1 and base 2. So that's kind of the one little hiccup with this, is that for the base, you do have to do the base 1 plus the base 2. Okay, and sometimes you'll see it written as B1 plus B2. Okay, it's just shorthand, so you don't have to write that every time. Okay, but then keep in mind as well that we don't want this one in red. Okay, we just added that on to try to make the formula a little bit easier to understand. So whatever number we get here, we only want half of it. So we also need to divide by 2 to say, okay, I only want half of what I just made. So let's go to the next slide and kind of sum up all these pieces of trying to make this formula for area of a trapezoid. Okay, so here's the one that we're trying to get. We duplicated it to make this big parallelogram. Okay, so again, remember, instead of base, we need to do that base 1 plus base 2 to make up that side of the parallelogram. We times by height like normal, but then in order to say, hey, we actually only want this yellow one here. We don't want the extra one we made. So whatever that entire number is, I'm just going to cut it in half. Okay, so this is your formula for the trapezoid. And this parallelogram idea is how we got there. So for the next example, we're going to use this formula. So let's write it down again. B1 plus B2, all divided by 2. So for the height, I want that straight up and down number like we've been using. Okay, the bases are 21 and 6. And because the idea of duplicating it to get that area for a parallelogram is where it came from, I do need to chop that in half. Otherwise, I'd be getting double the amount that I actually want. And this 11 was just kind of there to throw you off, like we saw in the parallelogram problems there. Okay, and when you type this into your calculator, when you type this into your calculator, you do need to be a little bit careful about where parentheses are. Okay, so I like to do it in 2 steps. I like to do the top first and then divide by 2. Okay. Sometimes people will forget to put the parentheses, which gives you the wrong answer. So just be careful that you type it in exactly how you see it. Okay, or break it up into chunks if it's easier. So this last slide here, I'm going to have you either just in your notebooks, or if you printed this out from the day before, I actually want you to write this last slide that we're going to do. I want you to write the formula for parallelogram and write the formula for trapezoid when we go through them, okay? Just so you have one place where you can see all of your formulas here. So I suppose we could just do it right now. Oops. Base times height. Let me redo that quick. Base times height. And then trapezoid is the height. And then parentheses B1 plus B2 divided by 2. If you want to write that B1 equals base 1, B2 equals base 2, you can do that as well. Okay, and from the next slide, if you want to draw an example of what each of the shapes look like with where the H comes from, where the B comes from, you can do that too. Okay, but let's kind of sum these up. So for the parallelogram, I just want the straight up and down height times the base. So that slanty side was this just there to kind of trick me. Okay, and the height this time was drawn on the outside, which sometimes you see it on the outside, sometimes it's on the inside. So just make sure you're using the straight up and down height. Okay, so that's 364 meters squared. And then for this trapezoid, oh, my divide by 2 kind of got pushed around there. There we go. Don't know why it looked like that. So I take my height, the straight up and down side, and then add my 2 bases together and divide by 2. So again, there's a little bit of extra information in there. And make sure you type it in the order that you see it to get your answer. Okay, so for the homework, you have a Google form to complete. Some of them might not relate to exactly what we just did, so remember to use the math notes if you need, or look back at some old lessons if you need practice, or use the video answer keys to help you. But please make sure you're checking your answers as you go. Thanks for hanging out.